So here are 10 things that people do to their cars regularly without even thinking about the consequences of it. And it can lead to the point where you've killed your car. We're not talking about really stupid things like driving over curbs, driving into brick walls, or lending your car to your teenage children. These are innocent habits that people pick up over the years that really do lead to long-term problems with your engine and are damaging your car. So if you've got a family member that uses your car, it'd be a good idea to just get them to review the content of this video so they can look after your pride and joy and not contribute to its detriment over the long term. So I've ranked these 10 things in reverse order, and I've taken all of the breakdowns that could be attributed to these problems, and I've divided it by the likelihood of people not doing these things to cause that breakdown in the first place. So if you disagree with my order, please let me know. But hopefully the first few are unlikely to either cause a problem or they're things that people don't do very often. But as we start going through this video, you'll start to see that these problems mount up. So what are the 10 most common car killers? We're going to take them step by step, but look out for number 10, because this is probably the single biggest contributor to engine problems and car failures in the long run. And I wouldn't mind betting that every single one of you watching this video has been guilty of it at least at some point in their driving career. So let me know if you've done any of these things, or if you know someone that's always doing these things. So the first thing is quite a simple, obvious thing: choosing the wrong fuel for your car. So obviously you wouldn't fill a diesel car up with gasoline or petrol, depending on where you are in the world. But what about the choices on offer at the pump? Much of the fuel that's available is offered in different octanes, and the octane plays a big part in the way your engine works. If your engine has been designed to use high octane quality premium fuels, then by using the lower grades of fuel, you're actually damaging your engine in the long run. Most modern engines with a high compression ratio work so much better, so much more efficiently on higher octane fuels. And in order to get the lower octane fuels to burn efficiently, they've got to really fudge the timing and everything else in the engine just to stop it from detonating and having problems. And it makes the engine really inefficient. The other thing to consider is if the fuel you're using contains ethanol, is your engine capable of handling that okay? It's not so much of a problem nowadays. Most modern cars have been designed with components that are perfect for running ethanol based fuels, even pure ethanol in some cases. But a lot of older cars require adaptation because the ethanol damages a lot of the rubber seals and components within the engine. Now, another problem that we need to talk about is driving in the wrong gear. And I'm not talking about the clothes that you're wearing, unless you're a middle-aged man. I heard a joke once: what's the difference between a clown and a middle-aged man? The clown knows he's wearing funny clothes. So if you're a middle-aged man, ask a younger person for a little bit of advice on your wardrobe. But thinking about the gear that you're using in the car, a lot of drivers have what we would call a versi gear. It's usually third. It's a gear that's sort of okay most of the time. So sometimes it's at high RPMs and sometimes they're really lugging the engine. But rather than change gear and choosing an appropriate gear, they just stick it in this one versi gear. The extremes the engine experiences at these extreme RPM differences adds to the wear and tear on the engine and doesn't really do the engine very much good at all. So always try and choose an appropriate gear for the speed, the conditions and what you're requiring of the engine. Be really grateful if you could just smash that like button for us. If you've not subscribed, please do so. We've got lots of other car related content coming up. Let me know in the comments what you want to see here. So with servicing the car, it's often something that people overlook or dismiss as not being very important, but actually it is vital. If you've got the wrong grade of oil in your car, or the oil is old, it's degraded, it's full of sludge build-up from the combustion process that oil collects over time, and the oil level has dropped, so you've got low oil pressure, that is really accelerating the wear and tear going on inside your engine. Regular servicing at the very least requires that the oil is changed and everything else in the car is reviewed just to check that the car is in tip-top condition. And also things like spark plugs and anything else in the engine that affects the efficiency of the burn can have a bearing on other components in the car. So if the engine was running inefficiently and it was, for example, running rich, that would put extra pressure on your catalysts or your diesel particulate filters and cause problems in the long run. We've got another video that we've just put up about using the wrong oil in your car. It was a real eye-opener to me, just researching researching that subject to just realise that lots of manufacturers have got very specific requirements when it comes to oil, and just going by the grade on the tin is not enough. A lot of modern cars need a synthetic oil, and a lot of modern cars, particularly the European car models, really need specific sets of additives in the oil to protect the engine and avoid all sorts of problems in the long term. So don't skimp on servicing, don't miss those service schedules, keep an eye on your oil levels and just make sure your car is properly lubricated and running as efficiently as possible at all times. Another common thing is wrong tyre pressures. A lot of drivers will give their tyres a cursory glance, hoping to see if there's not enough air in it. And if you can actually see that your tyre is too low, it is seriously too low. In fact, you can lose about 10 or 15 psi with no visible, discernible difference on the exterior of the tyre. So making sure that your tyres are at the correct pressure will improve your fuel economy, the overall efficiency. But if you neglect that, what's happening is the tyre is flexing a lot more. You're not getting enough grip from your tyres because it was designed to work at a certain pressure. So you're actually upsetting the handling, which is downright dangerous. The tyres, due to the excess heat that's building up, will degrade a lot more quickly, and you often see cracking between the tread patterns on the tyres where this has happened and the tyre has been allowed to be underinflated. Checking your tyre pressure should really be a weekly job, but how many of us actually check our tyres? Please let me know in the comments if you're one of those fastidious owners that keeps a close eye on their tyre pressures, or whether it's something you just do once a month or once every 6 months. So another common area, and this particularly applies to turbo engines, but it's generally a good thing to bear in mind for all different types of car, is when you've driven it really hard, allow it to cool down before you shut the engine off. I remember my granddad, he used to sit in his car and just as he shut the engine off, he would rev it really hard because it made a good sound as the engine revs dipped, and it would burble and misfire a little bit. It sounded fantastic, and that's probably why he did it. But he was storing up all sorts of problems to himself just by revving the engine really hard just before shutting it off. The problem is the oil circulation. So the oil is helping to protect the engine, particularly the turbo. And when you've got hot oil locked inside a turbo, it's not going to lubricate very well. It's just going to burn off and leave the engine with very sludgy oil and big deposits of sludge in the oil, which further causes problems with oil circulation in the long run. So the next area we're going to look at is riding the clutch. So this is where you just hold the clutch at biting point. Now the clutch is designed to be on or off. It's not designed to be held at that biting point. And I often see people sitting on hills, and instead of engaging the handbrake and stopping the car moving into neutral, they keep the car in gear and they ride the clutch, allowing the clutch plate to handle all of the holding of the car. So what's happening there? You've got your clutch plate that's taking the spin from the engine and will transmit that to the wheels, and instead of allowing it to transmit it to the wheels, you're holding the plate slightly apart, so there's a little bit of contact but not quite enough to drive the wheels. So effectively you're causing the clutch to slip, and that is causing so much heat build up in the clutch and is a really good way of destroying that clutch. In fact, I've seen people destroy a clutch within a year just by having that really bad driving style. So another issue with using the clutch is keeping the clutch pedal depressed. You're actually loading up the clutch cable and the clutch release mechanism, so it's under constant tension, and anything under constant tension is experiencing extra wear and tear, so it's more likely to fail sooner in the long run. And if you were sitting at a junction and instead of engaging the parking brake, you just dipped the clutch and had your foot on the foot brake, if someone were to rear end you, the car would just release from that condition as your foot came off the brake and off the clutch, and you would propel forward. So it's actually very dangerous to just use the clutch and dip the clutch rather than actually move it to neutral and engage the parking brake. So there's quite a few reasons that we should think about the way we use our clutch very carefully. Most cars have got a red line shown on the rev counter, and that's the upper limit the manufacturers have set. As an engine moves more quickly, the vibrations it creates accelerate and you get more vibrations. So manufacturers have protected the engines usually by fitting some kind of rev limiting device. But generally, the higher you go towards that RPM range, the greater the stresses and strains that the engine is experiencing. It's perfectly fine to use the full rev range now and then when you're overtaking and when you need to, but constantly driving around at those really high thirds of RPMs is going to do long-term damage to most modern engines. Let me know if you disagree with that. I know a lot of people have got very set opinions on modern engines, and there may well be some exceptions there on different engines, so please let me know your experiences. But generally, my recommendation and things that I've been told over the years is to avoid constant high RPM driving. For a number of reasons. It builds up heat in the engine, it exacerbates the wear and tear on the engine, and the engine oil is working a lot harder and it degrades more quickly. So you should probably even shorten your service intervals if that is your particular style of driving. So another common problem that I see people doing all the time is when they're driving downhill, rather than select a lower gear and allow engine braking to halt the acceleration of the car down that hill and just lock at a steady speed, they use the brakes. So the way the brakes work, you're pressing a pad against the disc and it's building up heat, so it's transferring the kinetic energy into heat energy. So those brake pads and brake discs and the brake fluid are getting extremely hot. So I've known drivers to go down a long hill or a long downhill run with the brakes slightly contacted just to arrest its acceleration. And then when they've needed to use the brakes in anger further up the road, it's not worked. They've got brake fade, so the brake fluid has got too hot. The pads have degraded. They're no longer biting and causing friction just due to the excessive heat buildup. And it is possible for the brake pads to actually combust and catch fire in extreme circumstances. You notice that race cars often at night have glowing brakes and you can really see the heat going into the brake disc. So it's really not good to just hold the brakes on downhill. Choose a lower gear. It's much safer, and it just guarantees that your brakes will work for you when you need them to further down the road. And if you're guilty of this, or you know someone that's guilty of this, it's quite a serious and dangerous problem. So tag them in the comments and let us know in the comments if you think this is a major problem that needs to be flagged up, or whether you think modern cars can get away with it, and due to the design of brakes nowadays it doesn't matter so much if you just ride it down the hill. So another thing a lot of people do, they get into their car on a cold frosty morning and they drive it really hard. The engine does need time to warm up to its operating temperature. Engine oil has been designed to work effectively at higher operating temperatures. So let's answer two obvious questions. What happens when you leave your car idling on the drive to warm it up? And what is the damage that is actually caused to your engine when you drive it before it's warmed up? So what happens when you just leave your engine ticking over, for example on a cold morning on the drive? Well, in tick over mode, the engine is trying to warm up. It's generally running rich. So that causes a problem with both gasoline and diesel powered cars. So what are the problems that happen when you warm the engine up very slowly, just using tick over rather than driving off? So if the engine is cold, first of all, the pistons and the metal in the engine hasn't expanded properly. So it's not going to work as effectively and efficiently as possible. And you can actually damage an engine if you drive it too hard on a cold engine. The most common cause of that is obviously the engine oil not working properly, and you've got excessive friction building up in the engine. You get hot spots, the metal degrades. I've known piston rings to crack and all sorts of other problems to crop up, including head gasket issues. So really avoid getting into your car and driving it hard. So until the engine is properly up to operating temperature, you should keep it to the low third to half of the RPM range, preferably that low third, and the car will warm up much more quickly if you're driving it. So don't make the mistake of just leaving the engine running on your driveway on a cold day. The acids will build up from the combustion process at those low RPMs. You're putting a lot of extra moisture into the exhaust and the exhaust components. So if you've got a catalyst or a DPF filter and an exhaust, you're going to have problems with deterioration just due to the moisture buildup in it. So be extra careful. Don't rely on the engine coolant temperature sensor to tell you when the engine is warm enough. You really need to go by the oil temperature to get a real feel, because the coolant tends to warm up quite quickly in the engine and then it's allowed to circulate through the radiator in most cars. There's a few exceptions. Let us know how your coolant system works in your car and whether you feel this is still a major problem that people need to be aware of, or that cars have moved on and it's no longer a major concern. So the biggest problem, the one thing that most drivers do that causes the maximum amount of damage to their engine, is short journeys. So why are short journeys so damaging? What are some of the problems that happen when you drive on a cold engine, when you drive hard on a cold engine, or when you never allow your engine to fully warm up? If you make short journeys on your car, it's never getting up to operating temperature. The acids, the moistures and everything that's building up from this inefficient combustion process is all being dumped into the engine itself, into the engine oil, components in the engine, the exhaust system as we've just mentioned, and it causes all sorts of problems. In fact, if you've got a diesel with a diesel particulate filter in the exhaust, it will clog up. They require a certain amount of heat in order to burn off the soot particles that are collecting. So if you're only ever driving on a cold engine, or most of your driving is on a cold engine, your DPF filter is just going to block up. If you've got a gasoline or petrol powered car and it's got the catalyst as well, they don't work effectively at lower temperatures, and when an engine is cold it tends to dump more fuel in order to warm it up, so it's effectively running rich. And when a car runs rich, there is damage that is done to the catalyst. They really do not like unburnt fuel going through them, and they very quickly degrade. What happens is the unburnt fuel gets collecting within the catalyst and makes the catalyst much hotter than it needs to be. So effectively you will see your catalyst starting to glow in really worst cases of rich running. And if you're only ever using the catalyst in those conditions, you're going to damage it and it's going to stop working, and that's going to have other problems on the engine as the ECU starts to decide that it's not working within parameters and it's backing off the fuel or altering the timing to compensate and trying to run effectively. And eventually you'll be significantly down on power and you'll have a massive repair bill to face. So hope this video has been useful to you. You've picked up a few tips that maybe you can pass on to friends and family that are guilty of some of these things. Do let us know in the comments what you think of this video, whether there's anything I've missed as well. I'd be particularly interested if there's something significant that will damage your car that most drivers do that I've not mentioned in this video. And be sure to drop us a like, because that really helps us to get out there. And don't forget to subscribe. We'd love you to stay tuned and catch up with all the content we're pushing out. Thanks for watching.